Good day and welcome to another episode of Three Guys and the Word. My name is Andrew Omer, and as always, joining me, our fellow evangelist brothers in Christ, Eric Parker and Chris Miller. Uh, we're located in the Louisville, Kentucky area, and it is great to be among you once again. We're continuing our study in the book of Esther, and we hope that you will have your Bibles out and you will follow along as we continue looking at chapter 1 of the book of Esther. And that's part of the historical books, uh, maybe a section of scripture that you haven't spent a lot of time in. And we just hope that what we're talking about will further your interest in finding out who God is and what God has said. And looking very much forward to what we're going to be talking about today. But just before we do that, as always, just seeing how people are doing this morning, how you all are feeling and what's going on with you. We'll start with Chris. How's it going, Chris?
Going good. Wrapping up summer league of basketball this weekend. So last 2 years we've only lost one game throughout both summers, so that's been good. It's always exciting and fun to spend time with the kids and have them involved. It's really rewarding to do that. And then Shively's going good. I got one more class left in my Messianic Prophecies next Wednesday, and Eric's doing VBS next Monday at Mount Washington. I'm doing Tuesday, so that'll be enjoyable too. And then always, appreciate the time we have together to be able to do this, and looking forward to continuing this study, Aster. How you doing, Eric?
I'm good. I had a very busy weekend. I did a gospel meeting down in Shepherdsville, Kentucky, at the Hebron Lane Church of Christ, and a lot going on. It was Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday night, Sunday morning, couple lessons there, and then Sunday night, and then I had all kinds of eating arrangements and things too. So very blessed, and got to create a whole lot of relationships and to continue building some relationships. So it was a very exciting time, and those lessons are online too. So it's nice to have those accessible. My fourth book is available. Everybody in my family's healthy. I know that a lot of people are sick right now, so my family's healthy. So things are pretty much in the groove for me. So I'm very excited about being with you guys this morning.
Well, glad to hear all those good things and glad that we have some very positive things going on. And I mean, it's good to be able to say things that are positive. There's a lot of gloom and doom that go around, and that's a never-ending thing. And we shouldn't be ashamed to say, like, hey, this is good things. Makes me think of rejoice with those who rejoice. I mean, there is that weep with those who weep, but there think that we forget that first part so often. And we can rejoice, and we need to rejoice. And glad to hear those good things and positive things that are going on. As I said, we're picking up in the second part of chapter 1, but as always, we'd like to just kind of briefly highlight what we talked about last time in the first part of chapter 1. But before we do that, I've asked you, Chris, if you would re remind for us our principal verses for our Esther study.
Our principal verses come from Esther chapter 4, verses 13 through 14. It says, "And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, 'Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?'"
And so, Chris, just take a couple minutes just to kind of um, highlight what in those first 12 verses stood out for you.
Well, I think it's interesting you have, and I know Eric dealt with this somewhat from a scientific perspective this past weekend. You think of people that are skeptical of the Bible and say that this is just made up and it's not real. It's interesting how you have people like Xerxes, you have people like Darius, his father, you have these individuals that people accept as factual people that lived. The scriptures talk about these people, and you can see the timeline with this. And I think really this just kind of authenticates, that the scriptures are real. It's interesting. Someone will read a history book and accept that to be factual, and then read this and say that it's not. So I think that part of it's interesting. I like how you see, Persia and Media, those are accepted as real too. So it's not like the Bible's just making things up. These are real events that really happen with real people. We did talk quite a bit about the king's house, this feast that he has. He he's trying to show off and show off how prosperous he is. And I remember when we talked about it 2 weeks ago, I kind of poked at the question of who paid for all this. I'm having a party for all of you, but you're the ones that really paid for it. So I think this kind of reveals a lot about uh, the king's character to begin to kind of understand who he is, kind of what makes him tick, the things that were important to him. We did talk about how this feast more than likely lasted for 180 days. That's a long time to feast, and there's no telling everything that happened probably in those 180 days. But it's a very carnally minded, physically minded king that we're talking about here, and probably more than likely many of his subjects and people are the same way. So you have carnally minded people. What possibly could go wrong with a bunch of carnally minded people together? And where we kind of left off was, the king calling for the queen to come, and obviously he is probably not going to like her response. So kind of left on the cliffhanger, which I'm looking forward to looking at today. But I think it is interesting that you have factual people that people historically accept to be real. They are mentioned in the scriptures. This is another way. Obviously, we accept a lot of these things by faith, but I think this is another strengthening thing to our faith that you can authenticate real people, real events taking place in scope of the scriptures. So I think that that's something that encourages me as we start this study in Esther. We got Eric.
Yeah, we kind of tied things in historically to the Medes and the Persians fighting with the Greeks on the west, and that the Greeks were able to, in many of those battles, defeat the Persians or give the Persians rousing losses. Even when the Greeks lost, they would really eviscerate a lot of the Persians. And then, of course, the Persians, any of them who were wounded, were like a million miles from home, So that, you probably weren't going to make it back even when you were wounded. So it does give us a good, strong historical context for this. It does help us to understand why Xerxes would be motivated. He's called Ahasuerus here. Why he would be motivated to sort of parade his exploits. He's got probably a wounded ego in this context, and he wants to sort of showcase and show off to try and compensate. He's overcompensating really, really bad with his 6-month feast for his counselors. But none of his counselors probably going to want to say anything because nobody wants to go marching across the empire to go fight the Greeks again. Because they probably have suffered huge losses. They're like, yeah, let's stay here at Susa and keep the party going, man. So they're probably, egging him on, which is the worst thing in the world for his ego. But I can't necessarily blame them for wanting to stay at home, given the alternative of going to war with the Greeks. That would have been quite challenging. The famous Leonidas of Thermopylae, um, and some of those other major battles that they had to fight. Yeah, no, I would be hanging out here too. I don't know if I'd be engaged in some of the same stuff they're engaged in, but I'd be trying to stay home as much as possible. So you can't blame them for that. But one of the things that you'll notice in verse 7 in chapter 1, the drinks are in the golden vessels of various kinds. There's wine going everywhere. This definitely is a callback to um, Daniel 5. Daniel 5, where Belshazzar is sort of ignoring the signs of the times and the downfall of the Babylonian Empire. This really is kind of the heart of Medes and the Persians starting to experience decline because of the Greeks and because of the inroads and defeats of the Greeks. So there really is a strong context here, and this is a great example of history sort of repeating itself. Although here they're not using the vessels from the temple of Israel and Judah, specifically in Jerusalem. They're not doing that because they have returned those things. So, you get Cyrus who sends the Jews back, and he sends the implements back, and he encourages them to rebuild the temple, and all those sorts of things. But then, you sort of have this high point as the Medes and the Persians. You're like, okay, these people aren't too bad, and then you get a very quick reminder. No, they're doing the same kind of stuff. And so the same destiny is going to meet with the Medes and the Persians. They're going to be defeated by the Greeks, and then the Greeks will have their heyday, and then of course the Greeks will decline too, and the Romans will take over, and then the Romans will decline. So it's the same cycle of history that happens over and over again, but we're right in the midst of it. And of course, Chris brought up some good points there about just the authentication of our faith. Andrew?
Well, just as you were stating, Eric, like every great empire or power that is arose throughout history has at some point fallen, and they're no longer. So you should be mindful of just like where we live, and how long will that last? We may think to ourselves, "Oh, it'll never happen to us." Just like you can imagine Persia for some time thinking, "Oh, we'll be in power forever, and nothing can defeat us. Our gods are on our side, so to speak." And we just see over and over, example after example of there's a apex that is reached, and then eventually there's a decline. Sometimes that can be very quick. Sometimes it can take time. I will say something, and hopefully I can articulate this very well, or at least to where it makes sense. We can see from this example a lot of foolishness, what it appears to be from Xerxes. But I also see that there is an intelligent side to this. There's like a cunningness to this a man. He's got a vast empire that he's trying to keep under control. And what better way than to try to appease people, especially after a great defeat, and his troops, armies being gone for long periods of time, and then having a celebration, trying not to think about those difficulties and downfalls and your foibles. And a lot of people do some stupid things in life, and we always do, and we'll always make mistakes. And I'm not saying that this is a good thing, but there is some sort of demonstration of intelligence. Like he's not a complete fool or idiot. I'm not saying that I would throw a big bash or something, but I mean there is some cunningness as far as I want to make sure that I'm saving my own skin, hopefully. So I'm going to kind of um, look to their desires of the flesh, and try to please these people to keep them on my good side. That takes some thought and some thinking. So it's not like he is complete ignorant and probably doesn't see things kind of shifting in some aspects. Um, Recognizing that, hey, he's vulnerable. I mean, we see throughout scripture of kings coming and going so quickly, especially in Israel's history. And we just know that being in a place of authority, there's always that concern of who's going to take my life. It's like you have to have one eye open always, looking out for oneself. So just wanted to point that out. Like I don't think that he was not a dummy. I think he went to his head, of course, thinking that probably he felt invincible, that he couldn't be beat. And obviously, he had a rousing um, loss against the Greeks. But I mean, a lot of people would just want to go and hide. And I'm not saying that he may have not possibly done those things, but there is some, um, I don't know if like what word, uh, smart, or, um,
There's a method to the madness.
yeah,
There's a strategy.
yeah, strategy or strategy going on here. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, and so let's pick up in verse 13. And there's not necessarily a good division here, so it's a little bit longer passage that we'll break down. But Eric, if you could read verses 13 through 20.
Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for it was the custom of the king, so to speak, before all who knew law and justice and were close to him, Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marsina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and sat in the first place in the kingdom. According to law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? In the presence of the king and the princes, Memucan said, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also all the princes and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands by saying, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in his presence, but she did not come. This day the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's conduct will speak in the same way to all the king's princes, and there will be plenty of contempt and anger. If it pleases the king, let a royal edict be issued by him, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti may no longer come into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. When the king's edict, which he will make, is heard throughout all his kingdom, great as it is, then all women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. So lots going on here, longer section. We get the names of 7 princes. We had the names of 7 eunuchs earlier. We have 127 provinces as a description for the Medes and the Persians earlier in the chapter. These are all historical markers that have been verified by things outside of the Bible. And so again, all these numbers and all these examples, all these names, all historical in nature. This is not a made up story. This is not some kind of Shakespearean drama that's happening here in Esther. This is historical. And, you know, it's what's that expression? You couldn't make up something better than this. Yeah, that's exactly kind of how you feel here. So a few things to acknowledge, of course. It mentions that the wise men who understood the times, again, that's kind of a callback to the Babylonians. They did the same thing. The Chaldeans, the sorcerers, the astrologers, they looked to these sort of wise men to try and understand how he needed to move forward. Of course, Memucan's kind of like the Peter of the Persians. He's the one that steps up and he's the one that's going to be outspoken about this. And of course, he does it right. Everybody's kind of together and everybody's getting all fired up. And of course, Memucan blows it completely out of proportion. And he's like, everybody everywhere is going to have a problem because of what happened here. And you can just see his huge language that he used. He's like, there's going to be, what do you say? There's going to be plenty of contempt and anger. There at the end of verse 18, it's like, everybody's going to be upset. Everybody's going to have problems. We have to get ahead of this. It's a typical bureaucrat is what it is. He's like a classic bureaucrat, but he's either really dramatic or he doesn't like Xerxes and he wants to cause problems for him. So there could be a method to his madness too, because his suggestion to sort of head this off, he's like, it's going to spread like wildfire through the empire, but his solution is to send a notice throughout the empire and sort of like overcompensate in a way that it's going to become obvious to the people that the king has been snubbed. So it is interesting to me. I don't know if he's just flying off the rails or if he's got a method to his madness and he doesn't like Xerxes and he wants to try and deal with him. One of the things about the Medes and the Persians, as great as the empire was, I mean that in a sense of immensity and power, the Persian kings in the scriptures are so dumb. They are just so easily manipulated that I wouldn't doubt if Memucan is trying to manipulate him and Ahasuerus is just taking it hook, line, and sinker. So that could be part of it. I don't know that, but that could be part of it. The voiced concern is that Vashti snubbing her husband is going to lead to other ladies snubbing their husbands. So on the one hand, you're like, is this sort of like a patronizing culture that looks down on women? On the other hand, wives and husbands should be in good relationship to each other, and there shouldn't be a whole lot of fighting with one another. There should be honor and respect going back and forth. So on the one hand, you're like, is this sort of a male-dominated, egocentric culture that's crushing women? Or is it a legitimate concern in the sense of open disrespect between wives and their husbands, which would cause problems? I mean, if you have an example that's widely out there of this sort of activity where a wife disrespects her husband, of course, Vashti's a little more nuanced than that. But if you have something like that, maybe it would lead other women to disrespect their husbands. And if that is the case, then that's going to create a whole lot of problems. With the Greeks coming in, the Persians got enough problems. And so to have internal division in families would be a problem too. Of course, with Vashti, she wasn't going to pad Xerxes' ego. And part of the responsibility of wives is sometimes to step in the way of their husbands when their husbands are, uh, trying to run off a cliff. So, what Vashti did was honorable, but some could use that for dishonorable purposes. So maybe there's something to what Memicon is saying as far as a government official. But there's probably a whole lot more going on here that we just were historically ignorant of. We need to leave room, I think, for that. But it is funny that the solution is exactly what his concern is. So, and the king just like, we're gonna find out. His response is fitting with the Persian rulers' presentation elsewhere. Chris?
I think it's funny what we left off with last week. Verse 12, it talks about his anger burn within him. And then, like you said, the people around him kind of take advantage of that. It's like, oh, he's mad. He's angry. We could pretty much suggest anything with as wounded as this guy is, and he's probably going to do it. I think that that's interesting. You brought that out because you do know how, even back in these days, government officials at times were not the best people. Uh, but then it's like she's not only wronged the king, she's wronged all the princes, all the people. It's like she basically told him she wouldn't come and do what he wanted her to do. How does that really affect the whole kingdom and everybody else? So it's like really, he puts her in a bad situation where this could have been a problem that was solved like behind closed doors. But him trying to parade her out makes it a public thing where all these people then know about it. And then now he has to, he publicly makes a mockery of himself and his wife. And then now he has to go back and try to fix the situation. And then he just continues, like you said, Eric, just kind of foolishly continues to make it worse. He's embarrassed. So they're like, oh, let's tell everybody what happened to you to further your embarrassment. But actually, it's going to make you not as embarrassed. It's going to put the heat on her per se. And I think one of the main reasons I think that why this is said, which I know we're gonna get into it in just a second, but it's like, all right, if she does that and he lets it slide, that sends a message to every woman in the kingdom that if the queen can do that, they can do that too. So I think it's a mixture of what you said, and I think it's also that too, Eric. You had said with them trying to maybe manipulate him and kind of destroy him. I think that's 100% what's going on. But at the same time, it's like, wait a minute, if he lets this slide and our wives hear about this, they're going to do whatever they want to do. If he just lets this go on and lets this happen, and I think that's really what you see in 18. There will be excessive contempt and wrath. It's like, some propaganda kind of going on here, I think, in a lot of ways. They're really, like you said, kind of hyping the situation up to be something that it really wasn't. He shouldn't have made the request. This goes on Xerxes for making the request in the first place. I don't think he probably had the best intentions with the request. His wife probably understood that too. That's why she didn't go. So now it's, you think of like public relations. When somebody does something goofy, they'll try to repair their image really quickly. Well, it's on her. She's just not a good spouse. She's not a good queen. It's her fault that she didn't come here. And guess what? Now he's going to get rid of her because she's not worth it. I mean, you can kind of see that people spin things all the time to try to make themselves look better, and he kind of buys this hook, line, and sinker. I think honestly, kind of like you said, Eric, it kind of makes him look worse. It makes him look really pathetic. If your ego wasn't bad enough to have the party for 6 months, now you're doing this on top of it. There were probably people in the kingdom thinking this guy has lost his mind. And this is our leader. This is the guy that's leading us. And that, not only with them, you even see that with the nation of Israel. When you have a king like this, it usually affects the people. He should have been worried about his people and taking care of his people, but instead he's airing his own personal issues out for the whole kingdom to hear. It's unbelievable. And I think that reveals a lot about him and who we're dealing with here. Chapter 1 gives you a lot of information about Xerxes that is that is going to be really, really helpful as we continue to go throughout the book. What you got, Andrew?
He's one of these areas that, out of so many, where you just like to be like a fly on a wall in that place, where you would like to have heard how things were said, facial expressions, um, just seeing the scenario. But I get the sense that the king really sees now he's quite vulnerable, um, of just what happened. Um, and a solution has to be done. You would like to think that, and this obviously comes from a different mindset and different culture, but you would have liked to, okay, why couldn't the king approach his wife humbly, and them have a conversation? But of course, that just doesn't happen. And king makes a foolish decision. And now he's sort of um, in a very he's put himself in a very precarious situation, and he sort of tied his hands, and it's like he's got the rest of the empire against him in a sense. He's almost like up a wall. It's like, okay, uh, I better do this, or I'm like doomed. I'm signing my own death warrant in a sense. He, Essentially, we don't know for certain uh, if he's signing Vashti's death warrant, if she is uh, looking to be deposed. But if he doesn't do something, he might as well just flee, or try to find safety from the people that who knows what would happen if he didn't uh, do what is being suggested. Or but uh, it's just amazing how political this is taken, and just how quickly you can imagine just all these guys are like up in arms and just like going wild over what just transpired. And it's it does give us an interesting picture into just how certain things occurred. Um, and you would think that after having being okay, all your uh, like you've had your appetite filled for so many days, and you've enjoyed yourself, and then all of a sudden, boom, this just it would seem that you're just forgetting all your troubles for so long, and then all of a sudden, boom, you hit this, and then you have a quick shift of come back to reality of now we got a major problem. You had a major problem that had hit you. You sort of forget those things for a little bit. Now it's back to reality. Now we're back to having another major problem. And sometimes you just can't avoid issues, and they have to be addressed. And it's sad to see that something like this happens, but this is how things uh, can occur. And you wish that there was a better way. And of course, there are better ways to handle these situations. Um, it's sad that, as it was mentioned, that a husband and wife should be able to come together and deal with things instead of having, and this is obviously not coming from the cultural standpoint or from looking at a royalty standpoint. Uh, but ideally, you would think that, okay, a husband and wife should be able to sit down and talk about things. And I'm not saying that the king did what was right at all. Um, and I'm not saying that the queen did everything that was right. Um, but there is, of course, examples of you can take from relationships and how you should or shouldn't handle certain situations. And you may read this and not even consider that at all. The dynamic between a husband and wife. You may just read that and that may never come into mind. I know it didn't really come into mind until it was like pointed out by you all. So that's part of a reason, one of many reasons, as when we're having discussions like this, digging deeper and seeing things when we're really looking at passage in a deeper context. I was thinking, I don't know if you all would be okay with this, but uh, I was hoping that we would maybe look at verse 21 of chapter 1 and then sort of go through verse 4 of chapter 2, if that'd be okay. That would kind of bring us up to a good stopping point and really um, handle what's to come of Vashti, the queen. I think that sometimes, as we have mentioned in other studies, and this is a good reminder of chapter divisions are not always the best.
Hey, that's what I'm supposed to be the one who says that, Andrew.
I will plead for grace and mercy, and I do apologize that I stole your thunder there. But again, sometimes that does happen.
Yeah.
Chris, if you don't mind reading verse 21 of chapter 1 and go through chapter 2 and end in verse 4.
And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the words of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's providences, to each providence in its own script, and every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house, and speak in the language of his own people. After these things, when the wrath of King Ashur subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servant who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king. Let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the citadel, and to the women's quarters under the custody of Hegai the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, and let the beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young women who please the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. So it kind of goes along with what I'd said earlier, verse 21, 22. They're like, send out this decree, send out this message, because if you don't, we're going to get taken over by the women. That was the concern. That's what they were worried about. And that's it. Let each man master his own house. Now, the ironic part about that is really he he kind of showed the party guests that he wasn't in control of his house. She told him no. She
Mm.
stood up to him and said, no, I'm not going. So it's ironic that this decree sent out that all you're supposed to, you're the head of the household. You're the head of the household. Thing is, that's a scriptural principle that a husband's to be head of the household, but not in the sense of what he was saying. Uh, he made it hard for his wife to submit. He made it hard for his wife to love him and respect him. He made that difficult on her. Obviously, the commandment is still to have respect and reverence. Well, maybe not reverence, but respect and honor for one's husband as the way a wife should view it. But a husband should be loving and caring too. And he had put her in a very bad position. And what they're doing once again, it goes back to what Eric had said, the wounded ego type of thing. It's you need to set out this decree because if you don't, people are going to get the wrong idea. So guess what he does? Hook, line, and sinker. He takes the bait. He does exactly what they tell him to do. And it's interesting, and like you said, Andrew, with being a fly on the wall, you kind of wonder if everything they said to him, if he was so gullible, he took every piece that they gave him. You should do this. You should say this. You should send out this decree. It's kind of interesting to wonder how much he kind of resisted them telling him to do something, or if he was just, that ignorant that if they told him to do anything, he's like, all these people care about me. I'm going to do it. Type of behavior. But then they start appealing in chapter 2 to another side of him. It's like, all right, Vashti is terrible. She stood up to you. She told you no in front of all these people, and you're embarrassed and you're wounded. Let's find somebody better for you. So then they start appealing to that side of it. Where, we'll have like a beauty pageant. We'll have all these women come here, and you can pick who you want to be your new wife. Uh, Kind of sounds like a game show or reality TV show is what it sounds like, pretty much. We're going to bring them all to you, and you get to pick. So you've got a guy so far, just in the 2 episodes we've done, who is very wounded ego wise because of miscalculations with war, miscalculations with his spouse. When we get into chapter 2, he is completely, I think, in a way, he's broken. And pretty much he will do anything that they want him to do because you get to the end of verse 4. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. What he should have had, and I think that this also brings out an interesting point, and I'll pass it on to you, Eric. Having the right people around you is so important because they babied him and they coddled him and they made him feel good about his terrible choices. And it's like, I keep going back to what you said, Eric, about the whole political thing. They may have been trying to bury him and do that to him. But it's so important to have people around you that tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. Because they have given him bad advice after bad advice after bad advice, and he's too ignorant to see it. You think of a lot of kings, you think of a lot of political figures over the years. I mean, not even just to that magnitude, you even think in our everyday life. If you have somebody that's constantly giving you bad advice, you shouldn't be shocked when you get bad outcomes. So he's listened to the wrong people. He sits in the chair, he sits on the throne, but he surrounded himself with people that's not giving him sound advice. And boy, oh boy, has he created himself a mess that, ultimately he's going to have a difficult time getting out of. So that's one of the big things I think from this is we're not on a throne, we're not a king, we're not a dignitary to that extent, but we do have control of who we surround ourselves with, and we shouldn't want to get rid of people that tell us things we need to hear. We should hold those people up in honor and be thankful that we have them. I think if anybody would have if anybody would have said you shouldn't have done that, they'd have been like, Vashti, get out. We don't want you around here anymore. And you see, I think that complex with him. I think he was very wounded. His ego is broken. This is a man that, although he sits on a throne, I don't think he sees himself as much of a king. What you got, Eric?
Yeah. You sounded like a coach, man. He said, what did he say? Bad advice brings bad outcomes. That I was like cracking up because I could picture you out on the basketball floor, like rolling around in those Adidas's, and just dishing out the feedback. No, that was good. And that's like a proverbial wisdom sort of a thing, is who you surround yourself with is absolutely important. Yeah, you see the kind of the totality language again. They send out letters to all the king's provinces, to each province, to every people. It's to every man. It's like this big language that Memicon had used. Um, and again, what's happening is this is all being broadcast, it's all being aired like dirty laundry. Um, it's like hit the social media account for the Medes and the Persians. Xerxes just had Vashti turn him down. We don't like this. Man's supposed to be the king of his house, king of his castle. And they hit post or publish, and it's like the whole world can see it. It's just kind of It's just so silly. The Persians, to me, in the scriptures, are given such a silly portrayal. Um, that's not the that's not to say that the Persians never did anything shrewd, and they defeated the Greeks sometimes in battles that they really had no business winning. So it's not that the Greeks always won either. Or that the Persians were just kind of dolts, but a lot of the leadership made some poor decisions. Um, and of course, it's going to be broadcast in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, which cannot be repealed, which is another thing that comes up with the Persian law towards the end chronologically of the Old Testament. That the Persian law, once it's enforced, it's not revoked. That's something that comes up in the book of Daniel, something that comes up here, comes up in Ezra and Nehemiah. So, a couple of really important things for us. Yeah, it's definitely the king of the castle, like we're the man, we're gonna be the king of the castle. It's like if you have to do that, then you're not the king of the castle. You lead by example, you lead in love, and you lead as a servant. That's the way of the kingdom of God. And that, if you're doing that, then people will follow. People will fulfill their roles too. Uh, that's not to say that our responsiveness or our responsibilities are sort of abrogated by a bad circumstance. Because even in bad circumstances, we're supposed to do what we're supposed to do. A wife who is dealing with an oppressive husband, or a husband who's dealing with an oppressive wife, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be doing what they're supposed to be doing. But it does make it a whole lot easier when you have a spouse who is actively pursuing a positive relationship and a positive dynamic. We get the impression that Vashti probably was killed. We don't know that for sure, but it does talk about a decree against Vashti, and then that's hard to get around as far as like capital punishment. We pretty much don't read anything else about her. She's gone. I don't know of anything that would inform us in that situation, but it's not just something that's published throughout the empire. There is some decree against Vashti herself. Now, she could have been relegated as a concubine. She could have been dismissed as the queen proper. She could have been sent to some sandy region in the Nowhereville. There's a lot of different things that could have been done, but historically, she probably would have been killed for this. And that probably would have given some more teeth to this farce of an announcement to the whole empire. Look what Vashti did, and she was put to death. If you do that, I'm going to have you put to death. It's a fear campaign. If Vashti, of course you could do that if Vashti's sent to some desert region or thrown in prison or whatever too. She loses her status. I guess a husband could sort of say that to his wife too, in light of this decree. But either way, there's got to be some teeth to this decree. If you do something bad, then something bad's going to happen to you. And that's going to be the message of really Esther as we go on, just the corruption in the leadership. And yeah, a beauty pageant, it's so comical. You just reality is so much more interesting and absurd. than made up stories. You can't even make this stuff up. It's a beauty pageant. I mean, they're talking about cosmetics. They're talking about, a host of the show, like um, with Haggai, he's the moderator. It's so ludicrous, but it's like so fitting to history, and it's so fitting for the Persians. I mean, they found makeup kits and stuff from the Persians that totally would fit this. um, and it just again blows it completely out of proportion. But there's got to be some teeth to this because all the ladies, all the virgins are coming to Susa. Oh, by the way, for anybody who's listening, if you hear Susa or Shushan, those are just two alternate ways of saying the same thing. The New King James Version will go with Shushan. Susa is just a shortened version of that, and that's used in some other translations. So Susa and Shushan are the same. It's just two different ways of saying that. And again, we have found the ruins. Archaeologists have found the ruins for the citadel at Shushan. So we even have kind of an idea of what this citadel looked like, and like what the King's Garden looks like, and all these different elements that are going to come up here in the Book of Esther. But yeah, it's stroking the ego of Xerxes while manipulating him. We're gonna find you somebody who's better. Don't you worry about it, Xerxes. We're gonna have a big party now and figure out who's the most beautiful woman in the world. This is like Miss Persia universe. We're gonna have all of it. We're gonna do the formal wear. We're gonna do the swimsuit edition. I don't know. We're gonna go through the whole thing. It's just so ludicrous. But here we are, a long time later, 2,500 years later, and what do we see in our society? We're doing the same thing. We're doing the same thing. And so again, it just goes to show how shallow and vain people tend to be. And of course, even those are dominated by such a gross carnal appetite. I mean, it's men dressing up as women who are winning these things. So it's just don't look down too much on the Persians because we're doing the same thing in our society today. And where's the Persians and what trajectory are we on? So that's, I think important to remember. We're doing the same sorts of things. Before the Medes and the Persians, the Babylonians were doing it. Before them, the Assyrians were doing it. Before them, you got the Egyptians and other people who are doing it. The Sumerians, it's just, it's the timeless cycle of a degenerate society in rebellion to God, leads to degenerate activities, leads to degenerate attitudes, and leads to death of an empire, death of individuals. The gross immorality will bring gross results, as our coach said. Bad advice brings bad outcomes. Andrew?
Well, you just made me think of was somewhat similar to what, in some regards, to where Rehoboam had a number of bad counselors. I mean, he had some good counselors as well, but he didn't take the advice of the good counselors, took the bad advice of the bad counselors, and there was just that spiral that went downhill. And this is certainly not this is an understatement, obviously, of not the ideal relationship between a husband and wife, nor is it the manner of how someone gets rid of their wife and seeks another, obviously, at all. And there's just so much wrong with this. But again, historically, these things happen, and we can't overlook the reality of bad things did happen in history. I mean, we wish everything in history was a beautiful painting, so to speak, or a beautiful portrait, but there was some very ugly things that happened. And there are some things that God wanted us to know about, and this was one of those things. It is rather disgusting and appalling that this would happen. The ideal situation that we see later on in Scripture that Ephesians 5 talks uh, beautifully of and brings a lot of heartache to people because they don't like the language that is used, but just how a man and a woman's relationship is supposed to look like. And I mean, it gives a lot of in that section. I mean, of course, we won't go there, but a lot of responsibility upon the husband of demonstrating sacrificial love. And that's obviously not demonstrated here uh, towards or in the manner of Xerxes. He just wants to get a situation fixed so he could be not have any pressure. This is a great example of peer pressure and falling to peer pressure, and we can definitely relate to that of just when everybody is kind of get a picture of all these hounds around you and say, you need to do this, you need to address this situation. And so often we fall to peer pressure and we make just the dumbest decisions when people say, well, you need to do this and fix the situation. And this is a great idea of how to resolve this. Why don't we do this? And this will fix everything. And this is definitely not like a Cinderella moment. I get the feeling of uh, the women coming and to the king. If they're made known of everything and seeing this. Um, This would not be something that I can imagine would be something of joy to take part in. But what choice would they may have had, if any, um, if you were not married, a virgin? It's like, well, you're going to the harem, and sort of get a sense of this is just an ugly moment in history where there are a lot of things were going wrong, and we can totally relate. There's a lot of things going on right now that are wrong and ugly. uh, Nothing new under the sun, just a different form of ugliness and evil that is occurring, and just a lot of ungodliness that we've been saying, and just this short amount of scripture. And we'll get into it like, okay, where's God in all this? That's one of the questions that we maybe should be thinking about. And a lot of people might be thinking, well, why has God allowed such things to happen? Well, these people have choices. They have choices to make foolish decisions and come up with just crazy ideas. It's just amazing how we shouldn't be surprised. We see what goes on in our culture today, and we just see things like this. There's in many ways are similar to things that we see. Uh, just people throughout time have done some just not rational decision making, and that's what ever since sin crept in or came into the world, you just see over and over and over again just how devastating the effects of sin have just in people's lives. Any final thoughts before we close?
I think we covered a lot today.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can learn. Yeah, Esther's has real places, real people, historical places. It's in the Bible for a reason, for us to learn and uh, grow in the knowledge of wisdom. And it has a point, and hopefully, as we continue to see, and as we further in this study, we'll see more and more of why God has placed it in His book. And I appreciate our discussion. I think it's been profitable. We hope that what we've talked about has made you more interested in Scripture. We hope that you've been studying along with us and been reading the passages. We hope that you will meditate more on what we've talked about, and also just your relationship with God. I mean, that's the key relationship that we are supposed to have above all. And we need to make sure that that relationship is right. And if you have questions on what we studied or maybe something else in Scripture, uh, again, don't hesitate. Please reach out to us. You can find Chris at Shiva Church of Christ Facebook page, Eric or myself at the Taylorsville Road Church of Christ Facebook page, and at TaylorvilleRDChurchofChrist.com. Don't hesitate to reach out. We just want to make sure that we are doing what God would have us to do. And we thank you so much for tuning in. And Lord willing, we'll be back next week with another episode of Three Guys and the Word. But until then, may God bless you and take care.